Thank you. So we're a central hub for data science and data intensive research at the University of Bristol. We are one of the newer of the institutes. We've now existed for just about 4 years. I've been director for 3 of those. Our main remit really is to create multidisciplinary communities of researchers across the university and stretching out beyond the university to our partners. And we take partners very broadly to mean industry, NGOs, individuals, community groups, and all kinds of organisations that we've been so delighted to make partnerships with over the last few years. We run many kinds of events like this, talks, seminars, small group work, training. We provide modest amounts of funding every year for data science related initiatives. For example, we run data competitions. We've got one coming up very soon, which we're going to announce probably in a couple of weeks, which is a collaboration with the Food Standards Authority. And in the past, we've run data competitions with NGOs, charities, such as the International Livestock Research Institute, and before that, Bristol City Council. We also provide pilot project or seed corn funding to kickstart new initiatives and collaborations every year. So we'll have our next competition starting probably late autumn of this year. We run a service that we call Ask JGI, which is an email and meet service providing support for data science and data scientists across the university. So all kinds of queries can come to us. We have a very wide community that make use of that. We've probably answered 500, 600 queries over the last few years, some from PhD students all the way up to senior people in university wanting to develop new projects or new partnerships. So we have our own in-house team of data scientists, software engineers who can respond to those kinds of queries. We also act as the university portal for the Alan Turing Institute. The Turing is the National Institute for Data Science and AI. I am the Turing University lead, a kind of senior fellow for data science for the university, representing the university at the Turing. And the manager of the JGI, Patty Holly, is the university liaison manager for that relationship as well. So we're also tasked with developing initiatives through the Turing that can benefit the research community that we serve here at Bristol. Our priorities refreshed every year, but our priorities at the moment are societal challenges, data visualization, reproducibility and data governance, and fundamental research, fundamental methodological research. And you can see here in the slides some nice photos of the days when we actually had face-to-face meetings, which we're very much looking forward to getting back to. One of the initiatives that we started a few years ago was this celebration of data science at the university that we call Data Week. The past few years, we've run packed days of face-to-face events across the university and with our partners, including showcases and creative events as well. This week, we've decided to move as much as we could online for you, and we have 13 or 14 events over the week coming up for you, which are a mixture of talks and networking opportunities and training as well. I think I'm right that the vast majority of these are now booked. Is that right? Liz, Patty, Lily behind the scenes. So we hope that some of you will be able to join us at those events coming up. So for example, today, later on, we have our intermediate Python training course, which we're putting on in collaboration with the Advanced Computing Research Centre at the University of Bristol. Tomorrow, we have a talk with my colleague from the Alan Turing Institute, John Crowcroft, about the work of the Institute and what it's like to be a fellow. There will be another fellowship competition probably towards the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. So if you're interested in the opportunities that are presented by the Turing, then that'd be great if you could tune into that talk and maybe meet or chat with John afterwards. We've also got talks with external partners. So for example, Michael Green from Luna 9 coming to talk to us about data analysis and engagement with data and the use of data for public engagement, right through to the end of the week when we've got Tour of the Tidyverse and best practices in software engineering in collaboration again with the ACRC and our external partner Mango Solutions. So a good range of talks and networking opportunities that I hope many of you will be able to enjoy. What I'm going to do for this short talk really is to give an introduction to some of the kinds of interests of the community that we have here at the University of Bristol around data science. When I initially kind of envisaged giving this talk, it was really right at the beginning of the COVID emergency in which we find ourselves now. And as the time has gone on, I felt that actually what would be really interesting and useful maybe is to set the activities that we find ourselves engaged in now in the context of a movement which has really been going on for more than 100 years of how data science, so before even the term data science was coined, but how data science has been involved in social empowerment, social change, social policy making. It's an interesting time to take stock of the place of data science in society, I would argue. So over the recent months, we've seen data science move into the spotlight across the world as nations grapple with the emergency of COVID-19. We've seen advisory panels, some of you around the table today, I know that I'm involved in advisory panels. We've seen those panels take centre stage. We've seen national responses to operational calls for help pivot the work of individuals and teams towards collective efforts of monitoring, prediction, and narratives surrounding data science. We've seen decision makers and politicians speak of being led by science or led by data. Sorry, could somebody turn their mic off? Thanks. We've got some noise on the line. Thanks, that's great. So going back, we've seen decision makers and politicians speak of being led by science or by data in their decisions on policy and interventions and in their plans for economic recovery. We've seen clinicians look to teams of data scientists for support on aspects such as predicting infection rates, resource needs and outcomes. And we've seen science journalism owning many headlines internationally. And I think all of us have learned a new vocabulary of data science and data visualization, the language of curves and averages and R values. We should remember that data science itself is a relatively recent term used to describe the coming together of a broad suite of topics and disciplines, often including subdisciplines such as machine learning, statistics, time series modeling, data visualization, expert systems, probabilistic reasoning, amongst others. Research across and combining these disciplines has been employed to address issues related to COVID-19. We're seeing very high profile kind of risk assessment modeling, patient prioritization, screening and diagnosis tools, simulation and modeling, including epidemic modeling to explore the macroscopic behavior of disease, and simulation models for decision making around disease transmission and resource management and so forth in care. More recently, we've seen activities around contact tracing, how we understand social interventions, for example, monitoring the efficacy of social distancing, which is going on right now, of course, controlling misinformation, exploring online harms. We've seen logistical planning and economic interventions, automated patient care, data science supporting vaccine discovery and new treatments. And my colleague John Crowcroft, who is giving a talk tomorrow about the work of the Turing, recently published a paper with a team exploring the many thousands of academic papers published on COVID-19 over the previous months, isolating 22 prominent open COVID-19 data sets and 15 prominent community resources, as well as summarising some of the activities that are going on and will continue to go on. But this new visibility of data science in the realm of policy making and assessment, clinical support, is not restricted to the landscape of COVID-19. And over the past 3 weeks, we've seen momentum also gathering around the Black Lives Matter movement. So grassroots organisations of data activists, universities, libraries, NGOs and independent companies are all beginning to articulate their actions and impacts in terms of the data agenda. And I've got a few examples that I thought might be fun to share with you here. So this first one is a screenshot from Princeton University Library, where they are highlighting their open statistics and open data resources that they think might be of use to this particular movement. We've also seen, this is an example of one of the grassroots data-led organisations called Data for Black Lives, also based in the States. And they say on their website, and I quote, "Data for Black Lives is a movement of activists, organisers and mathematicians committed to the mission of using data science to create concrete and measurable change in the lives of Black people. Since the advent of computing, big data and algorithms have penetrated virtually every aspect of our social and economic lives. These new data systems have tremendous potential to empower communities of colour. Tools like statistical modelling, data visualisation and crowdsourcing, in the right hands, are powerful instruments for fighting bias, building progressive movements and promoting civic engagement." And they go on in their site to explain ways in which people can become involved. Another example is this 76-page manifesto from the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy group at the University of Pennsylvania, which provides essentially a toolkit for centering equality. It highlights positive and problematic practices for centering racial equity across 6 stages of the data lifecycle that they list as planning, data collection, data access, use of algorithms and statistical tools, data analysis and reporting and dissemination. And this movement is not restricted to these sectors either. So we also see commercial companies stepping in with engagements in the area. So here's just one example. This is the company. This is a screenshot from the website of the company Aspectum, based in California. They're a GIS software and services company. And here in this tool, they visualize the international protests for the movement to date. This was Saturday. This screenshot was from Saturday. The research shows the number of active protesters at any given day in any given city. The map reveals that where major protests are occurring, in this screenshot, it's Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and New York, followed in a second tier by Philadelphia and Chicago. The current version of the map you see here includes visualizations of protest group locations, approximate numbers of people in each spot with graphs illustrating the number of protesters over time, and inbuilt news updates with media references to each of them. So in this introductory talk for Data Week, thinking back through all this incredible period of activity for our fields, I feel I wanted to celebrate the history of data visualization as a mechanism for empowerment and as an agent for social change. And in doing so, suggest that the power of data science to persuade as we look to the future lies in open source, open data, and trustworthy systems. So let's start with 2 historical figures who will be familiar to you all, I'm sure, who set the bar high in this regard and opened the way for the modern employment of data science for social good and social change. Maybe not surprisingly, our first protagonist in this story will be Florence Nightingale. And there's a photograph here on the right of her roughly the age she was when the Polar Area or Rose Chart was published. By the late 19th century, in fact, there was a really strong interest in Victorian society, 19th century society, in mathematics, and particularly statistics as part of an advanced education and a way of bettering oneself, in a sense. Graphical data visualization was already quite a popular means of communicating complex information. One of the most famous examples of the employment of these kinds of methodologies was that of used by Florence Nightingale. And I found a lovely interview of her in later life when she, transcript of an interview where she said that she considered statistics to be a tool akin to the thought of God, and the practice of mathematical analytics to be perfectly reviving. During the Crimean War, her experiences came to inform her advocacy of data visualization in the service of decision making. Working in field hospitals, she was challenged by the squalid conditions of army hospitals and soldier barracks. She was well connected in her own right socially, and she was able to persuade Queen Victoria to let her study the issue. And together with the statistician and her friend as well, William Farr, they collected and explored data describing army mortality rates. They are known to have argued over methodologies for doing this and ways of disseminating data, but together they brought to light the fact that many of the soldiers in the Crimean War died of what they called preventable diseases caused by poor hygiene. Nightingale herself was the one stepping forward to advocate for the use of graphics to summarise this information. She was aware that, in effect, data visualisation was needed, and I quote her here, to affect through the eyes what we failed to convey to the public through their word-proof ears. Her invention was the elegant polar area chart, or rose chart, which is essentially a new variant of a pie chart, where each slice of the pie, and I'll show a picture in a minute, showed deaths for 1 month of the war, growing larger if deaths increased, and colour-coded to show the causes of death. In 1858, she published these graphics as part of the Notes on Matters Affecting the Health, Efficiency and Hospital Administration of the British Army, founded chiefly on the experience of the late war, and this was presented by request to the Secretary of State for War of the time. The Rose chart, which showed that epidemic disease, which was responsible for more British deaths in the course of the Crimean War than battlefield wounds, could be controlled by a variety of factors, including nutrition, ventilation and shelter. So if you want to take a look, these Rose charts are drawn on a polar coordinate grid. Each category or interval in the data is divided into equal segments on this radial chart. How far each segment extends from the centre of the polar axis depends on the value it represents. So each ring from the centre of the polar grid can be used as a scale to plot the segment size and represents a higher value. There is therefore, you'll have noticed, a drawback. It's the area rather than the radius of a segment that represents its value, and the outer segments are given more emphasis because of their larger area size, which arguably disproportionately represents the increase in value. So the circle on the right here has 12 sectors going clockwise, representing the first 12 months of the war. The circle on the left is the second 12 months. The superimposed dark shapes show the monthly death rates. The diagram illustrates clearly how a sanitary commission and the interventions arising from that dramatically reduced the death rate. And the Queen and Parliament from the time could see from the versions of the charts presented to them that the Sanitary Commission policy vastly improved conditions and reduced mortality. Florence Nightingale became essentially one of the first people to successfully use data visualization for persuasion, in this case monarchs and ministers, to influence public policy in health. Let's take another slightly later example. This is a photograph of Professor William Du Bois, roughly the time of the 1904, the time of the World Fair. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was born in 1868 in Massachusetts. He attended the local integrated public school and was educated at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and then Harvard, where he received a scholarship to read sociology. And during that time, he was also awarded a fellowship to study abroad at the University of Berlin, where he was profoundly affected by the contrast of his European life to his life back home. He received his PhD in 1895 and was the first African American to do so. He went on to work at Wilberforce University and the University of Pennsylvania before accepting a position at the University of Atlanta, which was to become his long-term intellectual home. In 1899, in the months running up to the World Fair in Paris, the African-American lawyer Thomas Callaway worked with the fair's American delegation and invited Du Bois to create an exhibition on African-American life. assembling a strong team of researchers around him, actually not just in Atlanta, but more widely than that, and of different levels of seniority as well. Du Bois created a multimedia gallery constructed rather like a cabinet of curiosities, and I have a photograph of that for you. So the photograph on the right is from the World Fair itself, and you can see the multimedia exhibition. So there are images that one can browse through. There are volumes underneath that one can take out and read. So it's very, very tactile. So this cabinet of curiosities type gallery was full of pages to turn and images for visitors to become engrossed in, all documenting and celebrating the variety and richness of the community. There were hundreds and hundreds of photographs, I think nearly 400 photographs. And most of these are documenting life of the community, everyday life of the community. Women at work, musicians, landscapes and buildings. It also included a bibliography of African American writings containing more than 1,000 titles, and you can see some of those at the bottom of that photograph. 4 bound volumes of more than 350 patents secured by African American inventors and other similar documented materials. The most extraordinary inclusions in this gallery, at least to me, were the many hand-drawn and boldly coloured charts and infographics that were used to illustrate the changes in African American life since emancipation, and to advocate for further momentum for emancipation of African Americans in other states. They displayed data visualizations describing population growth, political participation, educational attainment, and household and individual finances. The design of many of these images is really striking and bold, and I've got a few to show you here, but I can say actually there is a very lovely volume that collates, published by the Library of Congress, that collates all these images into one place. There are essentially 2 large sets of infographics. One set explored life for African Americans in Georgia, which at the time had the largest black population in the US, breaking down the number of black children enrolled in public schools, for example, family budgets, income and expenditure. There are people's occupations, the value of household objects, kitchen furniture and other such things owned. The second set panned out to a more macro view, comparing national and international data sets, such as examining literacy in Black Americans in comparison to other nations, as well as looking at what types of occupations Black Americans were, where they lived in the US, and how much land they held. So this image here is what I've called a spiral infographic. It's a line depicting the urban and rural populations of Georgia in 1890, and it starts at the top a little bit like a conventional graph, and then it bursts out into a sudden spiral resembling a kind of growing organic form. These works were made in ink, gouache, watercolour, graphite, and some of them also included photographic prints as part of the display. Many commentators have noted how much like later modernist art they were, but these were visionary graphics produced before that artistic movement really took hold. And for many, it is the power of the art of the data that has contributed to its kind of resonance today. So here's another couple. Here we have more sort of line graphs and histograms. These infographics are contextualizing the valuation of homes and other ownership, for example, property, by mapping social and economic events that impacted the value. And the one on the right, for example, you can see really clearly the use of colour, the use of embedded photographs of examples of individuals, kind of bringing the individual out of the story of the many. Du Bois described his gallery and the objects and the media within it as, and I quote, an honest, straightforward exhibit of a small nation of people picturing their life and development without apology or gloss, and above all made by themselves. And I think this is a wonderful early example that demonstrates how powerful what we would now call data science can be as a mechanism for empowerment and persuasion, in this case to a public audience and policymakers. This exhibition, after it finished its Parisian gallery, then toured the United States and became a focus for discussion across the states in the very early years of the 20th century. But how do these kinds of relationships, this relationship between data science and the public realm, and data science and empowerment, and as a mechanism for social change, how do those kinds of relationships play out in more recent times? So let's take another example that is current. The Centre for Humanitarian Data, or UN OCHA, as it's sometimes called, is a hub for data curation and an advocate for open data. It was established recently in 2014 with the aim of creating a future where all people involved in a humanitarian situation have access to the data they need, when and how they need it, to make responsible and informed decisions. The Centre has as its core an archive of about 20,000 curated, donated datasets. It also hosts the Humanitarian Data Exchange, known as the HDX, and the Humanitarian Exchange Language Data Standard, known as HXL. On their website, they refer to the HXL as a simple standard for messy data. And in fact, the use of HXL is focused on spreadsheet formats such as CSV or Excel, where HXL hashtags are added essentially between column headers and the data to allow their proprietary software to process data more easily, to integrate data sets, for example, and create insights more quickly. The centre is staffed by data scientists from across the disciplines, so statisticians and computer scientists, for example, and others. And it provides some analytics services, and they have a reporting function as well. So they're involved in those kind of internal discussions with other parts of the UN, as well as facilitating collaborations. And I first met colleagues from OCHA at a touring event last year, in fact, focused on data science in humanitarian events. So they're very much engaged and embedded within the research and dissemination community. They are advocates of open source. They use GitHub extensively, and the message of transparency and trustworthiness is articulated really strongly within their own narratives. The work of the centre is focused on 4 areas, which are illustrated by the infographic taken from their website here. They are data services, data literacy, advocating and providing support for data literacy, data policy, so informing data-driven decisions, and predictive analytics. And they have a number of main measures of success, essentially, which include efforts to improve the speed of data ingress from collection to use, to try to shift from using outdated information to understand humanitarian crises, to having data that reflects current day, near real time as possible understanding of any particular crisis. So that's the first. The second is increased connections in their network. So they have developed a shared data infrastructure and shared data goals for a large network of organisations, I think around 200 organisations, that are regularly updating data sets and working collaboratively in humanitarian settings. So trying to grow those connections organically. For increased use of data, so they're an interesting advocate for the use of secondary data, making sure that data are used better and more often by the people who are making critical decisions in a humanitarian response, and also trying to make sure that data and related insights are accessible to non-technical people. And that's very striking when you hear them present, or indeed if you're surfing around their website as well, that they are very good at articulating their mission and their findings in plain English, for example. Users are drawn from more than 200 countries, and there are many significant use cases that have been well disseminated since 2014. Interesting ones for us here would include the studies of social media posts documenting rumours, which have been used in the response to Ebola. So that's both early warning systems and disinformation studies. They've been involved in assessments of cash-assisted humanitarian assistance in Somalia as a mechanism for support and engagement, and other projects such as population displacement in the Republic of Congo. The Centre also curates a catalogue of predictive models to try and improve transparency, model sharing, and to make it easier for their partners to get a quick overview of the models that are available and current states of development. So this is an example of a data visualization summary of data from one of their projects. So going back to where we started, which is thinking about the COVID-19 emergency. So this is a mapping project that is interactive, actually, which shows the locations associated with data sets that they've received around COVID-19 in places that have a humanitarian response plan. So you can see here that in fact, on the website, you can click on individual spots. You can have a look at the numbers of total confirmed cases in near real time, total confirmed deaths, and locations. So Archer is interesting. It relies on the donation of open data sets from networked organisations, and at 20,000, I think they're doing quite well on that front. But there are other models of data collection analysis that have become equally impactful in recent years. And I want to give you an example of one of those, which is the Ushahidi open source platform. On January 2008, following the eruption of violence during the Kenyan election, the lawyer Ori Okola posted a blog post, and I quote, "We believe that the number of deaths being reported by the government, police and media is grossly underrepresented. We also don't think that we have a true picture of what is really going on. Reports that all of us have heard from family and friends in affected areas suggest that things are much worse than what we have heard in the media. We also, in my idealist world, hope that we can begin to put names and faces to the people who have lost their lives in this mess. What's the point of all this, you might ask? Well, Kenyans have demonstrated their capacity for selective amnesia time and time again. When the crisis comes to an end, we don't want what happened to be swept under the rug in the name of moving forward. For us to truly move forward, the truth of what happened needs to be told. Ushahidi, or www.ushahidi.com, is our small way of contributing to that." So the word Ushahidi means testimony or witness in Swahili. It was at the time of that blog post a very hastily compiled crowdsourcing platform and put together with a small number of people, including lawyers and data scientists and software engineers. The response to this blog post was extraordinary. People from all across the country answered the call and texted reports of violence from their mobile phones or via email. And these were used to populate an online map, creating a near real-time visualization of the rapidly developing crisis across the country. My understanding is that to verify the data and ensure the platform was trustworthy, a blogger was brought into the project to cross-reference the data with NGOs and other organisations. These data, when collected, visualised and communicated, it's argued, contribute to the subsequent prosecution of 3 people at the International Criminal Court in The Hague charged with crimes against humanity. So that was back in 2008-2009. In the decade and more since the founding of the platform, it's remained open source and driven to serve social justice. The platform is extremely user-friendly. I recommend you having a look. The automated data visualizations are uncluttered and quite interactive. The use cases have continued to grow. Everything, I've found loads of interesting ones in my research over the last couple of weeks, from conservation efforts, mapping animal sightings, for example, to supporting search and rescue teams in Haiti following the 2010 earthquake, to visualizing data describing the Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster. On the website, the team say they've counted 120,000 use cases and have logged more than 10 million testimonies or items of witness. Alongside these team efforts like this, there has also been an interesting development in what could be called kind of more individual efforts around information or data art and information or data design. And in some ways, this is the natural evolution from the imaginative and visionary work of early practitioners like Du Bois. So I thought it might be interesting also to take an example of the work of one of those practitioners that I think is particularly striking, and that is Federica Fragapane, who was an Italian independent artist and information designer. So Federica Fragapane is well known for her collaboration with science journalists. She, for example, last year, I think it was last year, produced a really wonderful data visualization of outer space, of planets with the BBC. But she's worked with science journalists, charities, NGOs, and museums, amongst others. She's designed data visualizations for the UN, for the tech magazine Wired, Scientific American, Penguin, and several times for the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera La Lettura. And the example that I've taken is of her work is from one of those pieces, where she works on the analysis and visualization of cultural, environmental, and social topics. So very much kind of social, driven towards a policy change and social commentary. She's also the author of a volume called The Stories Behind a Line, which is a visual narrative of 6 asylum seeker journeys. But the visualization I've chosen to share with you as part of this talk, I think really epitomizes her very organic style and the complex layering of meaning embedded within her work. This is quite a recent piece showing the Human Rights Protection Index from 1950 to 2014. And the Human Rights Violation Index in 2014 for 50 countries. The data are drawn from open data archives of the World Bank and ourworldindata.org, and the countries selected for the inclusion in the painting that you see are, in inverted commas, the top 25 and the bottom 25 for human rights violation. The countries are sorted along the horizontal axis by GDP per capita and along the vertical axis by population. And what I mean by the layers of meaning are probably best understood by zooming in a bit into the legend itself. So here you can see that going for the left, they're a bit, if you can imagine them like seeds and fans of seeds. The fan is representing the human rights protection by year, from 1950 on the left through to 2010 on the right. The line length of each fan indicates the level of human rights protection. So the scores measure protection from political repression and violations of physical integrity rights, and the longer they are, the better. And then the area of the circles, so this kind of seed bits, indicate the scale of human rights violations with on a scale of 1 to 10. And the data that are included within that visualization is all kinds of things, aggregated metrics on the basis of multiple variables like curtailing press freedom, civil liberties, political freedoms, human trafficking, political prisoners, and so on. And then the colour coding, the blue countries are the ones with the lowest 25 violations according to these data sets, and the red are the ones with more. So if we can go back and have another look at those, so we can find the UK on there, for example, and we can see the blue ones with the large fans down in the bottom right, and the red ones with the small fans up in the top left. And I think this is a really lovely example of where this collaborative working between artists and designers and data scientists collecting and analysing data can produce work that is impactful in its qualities of presentation, sharing a narrative which is quite difficult to share in some ways, and making it very accessible. So far we've largely focused on NGOs and not-for-profit organisations, but there's also a great deal of work in this space going on in other areas of the industry, and it's really hard to pick one or kind of favourites in these, but I thought this is one that might resonate with our current discussion. So this is a caption from the work of the data visualization company Periscopic. Periscopic is a data viz company based in the US, in Portland, in Oregon, which has been designing and developing exciting, moving and creative work for the past 15 years. The two co-founders, Dino Sitaro and Kim Rees, state their vision as being, and I quote, "From endangered species to politics to social justice, it is our goal to engage the public and deliver a message of responsibility and action." I've chosen this piece to show you because it gives a great example of animated data visualization employed to share, in this case, a very painful message and to encourage action. It's a serious and quite thoughtful graphic showing the number of gun deaths in the United States across 2 years, 2010 and 2013, in terms of life that could have been lived. The project was initiated as an in-house exploration of data for the Periscopic team itself. It's based on data from the Unified Crimes Report. It begins on the left of the image with a slow arrow-like arc, excuse me, of a life lived and lost, with tickers along the bottom counting the number of people murdered by guns in the United States in 2010 by month, as well as a number of stolen years those people could have lived. Curved lines flow across the screen, changing colours from gold to grey at the point each person dies. In an interview about this work when it was launched a few years ago, Citraro said, and I quote, "We chose to illustrate the vibrancy of their lives as bright orange and yellow arcs reminiscent of flames in the darkness. When a person is killed, we create an alternate life for them, a ghost life, a life that may have happened if they hadn't been shot and killed. This alternate arc is shown in grey, reminiscent of ash. The idea of using arcs is to hearken the nature of life, a birth, growth, an apex, a diminishment, and finally death. The result is a really delicate feathering of lines, creating a graph documenting lives lost by nearly 10,000 people in 1 year in one case. As it completes, the visitor is asked to investigate, hovering over the lines of the graph in an interactive way to find information about the person behind each arc, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, their relationship to the killer, and imagined futures about when and how they might have died years later. Users can also filter the data by categories such as gun type, region and ethnicity, gender and age of the victim. In the same interview, Chitara explains that these pieces of information help create a human connection. We're hoping that people will see these individual victims. We're not looking at aggregate numbers. The data was living and breathing and has now been extinguished. We're hoping the viewer can make an emotional connection with these victims and that it sticks with them moving forward. Animation is now key. This kind of work shows animation is now key to the data visualization toolkit. And as our last example, I'm going to look to the work of the UN in this space. This is taken from a very recent web snapshot of the UN Women's project called Visualizing the Data, Women's Representation in Society, and it is a post from February of this year. So this is another interesting example from a UN organisation. This time we see them harnessing the power of animated data visualizations with a clearly articulated aim to advocate for activism and change. The 7 case studies are all based on UN-gathered data and accompanied by a linked narrative, which also gives the work a slightly different character to some of the standalone pieces we've looked at here. The narrative begins, and these are their words, women's full and equal participation in all facets of society is a fundamental human right. Yet around the world, from politics to entertainment to the workplace, women and girls are largely unrepresented. The visualizations take a closer look at gender imbalance picture over time, revealing just how slow progress is. The consequences are far-reaching, with detrimental negative consequences on the personal, economic and future well-being of women and girls, their family and community at large. And on the website they end the statement with this one, How many more generations are needed for women and girls to realise their rights? And then there's a link then, join Generation Equality to demand equal rights and opportunities, or all share this, and there's a hashtag. So they're using these kind of animated data visualizations really as a call. The call to act is clear as part of this. So thinking back to where we started then, with the centre stage place of data science in our current emergencies that we've suddenly become so familiar with, we can see that perhaps that far from being a unique and new development, data scientists have been working for social good, for empowerment and social change for many years. We can also suggest that getting locked in the local will limit the impact of our work. We are very much a global community. Opening up our data, our operational protocols, our tools and our findings is essential for our shared future. The opportunities of the open data agenda are wide-ranging and will include many core benefits. And there's almost too many to list, but low-hanging fruit for me include areas such as food security, health and well-being, particularly the impact on children, and economic recovery. So I will end with a thank you. And forgive me if I omit to thank everybody. I know that there are people on this call, I've already learned there are people on this call that I did not know were involved in COVID-19 data science projects, and maybe I should increase my list. But I want to sign off by saying many disciplines come together as one in data science. To all those working in these disciplines at Bristol, in an effort to serve the communities of which we are a part through this emergency, to improve our futures and to drive change, thank you. So, thank you, Ellen Brooks-Pollock, Leon Dannon, Katie Turner, Ross Booton, Louis McGregor, Aaron Lim, Amy Thomas, Andrew Dowsey, Jonathan Stern, Catherine Looker, Hannah Christensen, Anna Gowenka, Emily Nixon, Begonia Morales, Catherine Hyams, Grace Edmonds, Jennifer Oliver, Jennifer Cooper, Lucy Vass, Mick Bailey, Oliver Davis, Claire Howarth, Ian Craddock, Rhian Wood, Isabel Oliver, Nick Timpson and the Ausback team, Jane Blaisby, George Davies-Smith, Tom Gaunt, John McLeod, Oliver Watson, Adam Finn, Silke Henkers, Jonathan Cooper, Lucia Minucci, Christopher Woods and the ACRC team, the Heilbronn Institute team, and to our colleagues at the many organisations that form part of the JGI family also involved in this work, to John Olakuru, Rosemary Okello-Orali and all the Strathmore University data team in Kenya, to the Institute of Statistical Mathematics in Japan and your work with Japanese policy, to our partners at the ONS, the Alan Turing Institute, Noel West Media Centre, to Jim Hammond and the International Livestock Research Institute team, to our friends in the Humanitarian Data Exchange, and to all our data science colleagues in the NHS, we thank you. We have a few minutes left. I think we may have time for some questions. I'm going to have a quick look. If anybody has any questions or discussion points that you'd like to raise, we could do that now. I should unshare my slides. So I should ask our coordinators behind the scenes questions. Okay, thank you. Let's have a look. How do I see the role of the JGI in data for social change? Thank you for that question. We have had the societal challenges as one of our priorities for 3 years now, and we've had the pleasure of supporting very many new collaborations and small projects in this space. So, for example, we worked with Noel West Media Centre on a project to look at the use of the internet, social exclusion, and the data divide in communities of differing heritages across Bristol. We have also made an effort to partner with organisations that may not have access to the same kinds of levels of resources or varieties of resources that we enjoy at Bristol, whether that's internationally or locally. And through my work at the Alan Turing Institute, I've also been able to advocate for collaborations with humanitarian organisations working in the data science space. So the HDX is one, but the International Committee for the Red Cross, Amnesty International and the Soil Association are others as well. So just as with all our other priorities, we really work to develop multidisciplinary communities and help communities that want to make new collaborations come forward and kind of give them some momentum, either with our small funds or through helping them put on networking events and finding potential partners. So that's really the role that we would want to play in. I'm looking at a time and we're probably just about at the end of this session. If you have any last minute questions, if you want to use the chat to share those, it really remains for me to say thank you very much for joining us in this first session. I hope you enjoyed that little foray into thinking about the use of data science in today's world, in our current emergency. I want to thank all of you for joining us, thank our helpers behind the scenes that make the whole week possible. Today, the coordinators helping me with this talk were Liz and Lily and Patty, taking the photographs. If you'd like to share your attendance or your thoughts on it on social media, that would be great. And we will be sending out a feedback form at the end of the week, so you'd be encouraged to let us know what you enjoyed, what you'd like to see in future years, whether the online forum worked for you. But I will take this opportunity to thank you all again, and I hope to see some of you again throughout the week. I'll be chairing a few of the sessions coming up. So stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to engaging you through JGI in the future. Thanks very much.